every time we would go out on a mission, and I would go on 2 to 3 missions a week, he would come and pray with us. And I got to the point where I was like, wow, I'm glad that I have this. Like, I feel so much more at peace when I go out on the road, when I do that. So there's this part of me that thinks, hey, is it a coincidence that the first time in my, where after my life had fallen apart, where I suddenly start praying or talking to God or whatever you want to say, is it a coincidence that shortly after that I finally found the courage to say, you know what, I need to quit drinking, and found the strength to ask for help? So I like to think that there was something to that. Like you said, God was speaking to you, and so I like to think that, you know what, I was asking for help, and in a way it led me to getting my life somewhat on track.
Battle Line podcast, and on this episode is Anthony Bryant, the host of Hair Metal Haven on YouTube, which you could check out. So, if you guys know me, if you're not new to the show, you may know there's nothing that I enjoy more than nerding out about 80s hair metal. So the fact that I came across Anthony Bryant, and he is even more of a fan of the 80s hair metal genre than myself, and he's a veteran who's been overseas and has some really amazing stories. I love when my worlds collide like this and I could find some type of connection to bring someone like this on Battle Line podcast. So whether you're into that music scene or you just like hearing about combat deployments and that stuff, you're going to love this episode. We also have a lot of inspiration, talks about overcoming a lot of obstacles in his life. So do not go anywhere. Chris is out this episode, but you know what I should tell you guys? We always get these great emails sent to battlelinepodcast@gmail.com. And sometimes they come in, we get a ton of them. Other times it stops for a little bit. We haven't done a Q&A episode in a little bit. I don't know when we're going to do one next. It won't be this month, but I'd like to get one in before the end of the year, or at the very latest early next year. So keep those emails coming to battlelinepodcast@gmail.com if you ever have anything that you want me to answer, that you want to have Chris answer. If Chris was here, I'd probably get in some news. It'll be a nice relief to not get into all this news and keep it positive, because quite honestly, a lot of the national news out there is, just to call it a bummer would be really putting it lightly. I mean, two of the stories that stand out to me for sure going on in our world were literally a literal Nazi getting a standing ovation in Canada that many of you have seen. And to me, this should probably be the number one news story, that Zelensky and Prime Minister Trudeau are there. And with all the vetting the government could do, they literally gave a standing ovation last week to I believe, 98 or something year old man who was putting Jews into gas chambers during the Holocaust. And this is who we're honoring, as if it was a man like Vincent Speranza that we had on the podcast, who was a true hero of World War II. And when you look at this, you go, I do not know how you couldn't think we are not on the right track, not only as a country, but as Western civilization as a whole, when this is being excused in many ways by the mainstream media. And then the other story that is just absolutely reprehensible is this 95-year-old Korean War veteran, Frank Tamaro, being booted from his Staten Island nursing home to make way for migrant housing. I don't have so much of a problem, or anger, I should say, with people who are coming over here looking for a better life. What I do have a problem with is the fact that we have a government who has done absolutely nothing to get this under control and has actually emboldened this problem to become worse. And that we have people who serve this country honorably being treated as second-class citizens to make way for people coming here as migrants. It's reprehensible, and I'm sure Chris would have a lot to say about it if he was here, and I certainly have a lot to say about it. But this episode will be a nice departure from some of this terrible news that you're hearing out there. But it would be wrong to not at least make mention of it, because both of those are absolutely in our wheelhouse of what we do here at Battle Line Podcast. Before we get into this interview, though, with Anthony Bryant, we have a brand new sponsor on board, Bird Dogs. And I just like saying it. Bird Dogs. I mean, and the shorts are great. Bird Dogs make you look good. Bird Dogs stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. They fit way better than regular shorts that are made of stiff, restricting cotton. They fixed this issue by inventing a cloud knit fabric that looks just like khaki but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Go to battlelinepodcast.com/birddogs for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's battlelinepodcast.com/birddogs for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off, we promise you. Great stuff. And you've probably heard them on your favorite podcast. We're really honored to have them on board with us. Once again, that's battlelinepodcast.com/birddogs. Also on this episode, a sponsor that if you're a listener of Battle Line Podcast, you're very familiar with, Bubs Naturals, the best collagen protein on the market. Great for muscle recovery, also for the rebuilding of joints that you've injured from wear and tear. Great for hair, skin, and nails. And also, you got to check out Hydrate or Die. You got to check out the best coffee out there, Bubs Brew. Apple cider vinegar gummies, great for cleansing the body. And 10% of all profits go to the Glenn Doherty Memorial Foundation. So you're helping a great cause in the process. Just go to bubsnaturals.com, use the promo code BattleLine, and you get 20% off as a listener of Battle Line Podcast. That's bubsnaturals.com, promo code BattleLine for 20% off. And with that, let's get over to Anthony Bryant of Hair Metal Haven right here on Battle Line Podcast.
From Kansas City to New York City, from planet Earth to extraterrestrial life in space, a podcast with no equal, engaged in unconventional warfare through your speakers and headphones. This is a show about embracing the suck, conquering your demons, and finding God in the face of adversity. Chris Tonto Peranto.
Switch is on. Motherfucker, I'm gonna shoot you in the face.
Ian Scotto.
You know, Ian and I have been dating for a long time.
You are now tuned into the Battle Line Podcast.
The switch is on. Battle Line Podcast. On with me is Anthony Bryant, host of Hair Metal Haven on YouTube. North Dakota Army National Guard vet, 22 years of service, retired as a captain in 2015, served as a combat medic in Iraq, also deployed to Kosovo, and currently a high school English teacher and basketball coach. And I do want to get into how this connection even happened, but it's an honor to have you on the show, man.
No, hey, thanks a lot. You know, it's awesome to be invited. I've watched a lot of your videos since we started chatting, and you know, we're both into that kind of music, and your support of the military, I truly appreciate. So it's awesome to be here.
Thank you. So I'll tell you how I came across you first, and I'll tell you how it happened. And I think a lot of the audience knows this, although I've been doing this type of thing with special operations, military veterans, even prior to this show with SOFREP and all that when I was working at Sirius XM. That's what that award is for back then.
Okay.
And met Brandon Webb, Navy SEAL, and kind of got thrown into this whole world, which has been really an honor to be a part of. I have many interests, but my number one fascination that I will forever, for the rest of my life, that I will read books about, go to shows, and always have just a major interest in is the genre that some don't like it called as, and I know you and I don't care as much, 80s hair metal.
Right.
I wish we could get into, because you got to live that whole experience. I'm a little bit later to the game because I'm 37. So I really got into it mid 2000s, you would say. So I'm always on YouTube watching, whether it's interviews with those guys or commentary or album reviews, which is what you do. I just was on my TV, and up there actually under my suggested videos was your video speaking about Janie Lane. And that's the type of stuff I love to watch. And watching that video, little did I know there was a military connection there, which there usually is not. So I said, this would be a perfect guest for Battle Line Podcast, because I could nerd out, but there's also a tie into what I do. So,
well, I'm the same way. I think about music. I mean, I've always told people, music is my life. Everything else is just a hobby. So, I read about it, I think about it, I listen to it. I'm always searching to learn more about it. And, through Twitter and there's a buddy of mine, Metal Mike, from the 80s Glam Metal Cast. He does a really cool 80s rock inspired podcast. And I thought, you know what? Like, why couldn't I do that? And so I started the channel. In fact, video episode number 10 will be uploading tonight. So I've been doing it for about 2 months, and you know what? It's just for fun, but it's enabled me to meet other like-minded people, and now people such as yourself who are into the same kinds of things. So yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about this music, and hey, doing the videos is a fun way to stay connected to it.
yeah, the thing that stands out about you, I think, and drew me to what you do, and especially the Janie Lane video, this was apparent, is that you not only are you a super fan of this genre, the thing is, as I said earlier, because of the age difference, you got to experience it in the heyday, but you were not one of those people who, once the 90s came along and as people would say, the grunge scene blew up, that you just walked away and stopped being a fan of that music. Even throughout the 90s, you were keeping up with these releases, going to shows, as you speak about. And to me, I just always have found that cool, because I've gone to shows where guys who were once playing stadiums are playing these smaller venues. And there's definitely something to be said about not going with trends and standing your ground as a fan of something that you love and something you're passionate about, no matter if it's the hip thing right now or if these guys are looked at as a bunch of has-beens by the rest of the world.
Right. And I would never give up. I always looked at it, these bands did so much for me, and I felt so connected to them when they were big. And then, when the tide turned and Nirvana came, and suddenly, the bands that I love go from playing 15, 20,000 seaters to playing 500 or 1,000. I could never say, oh, you know what? No, I'm done with you. And so for whatever reason, so man, in the mid 90s, I used to battle with people and defend these bands, and everybody was talking about, oh, yeah, that's those guys are gone. Now I like Nirvana and I like Alice in Chains. Well, I liked those bands. It wasn't that I bought a lot of those albums, but I was like, while I was listening to Alice in Chains, I was also going out and buying Warrant's Ultraphobic and Winger's Pull. And I thought, man, if people really gave those albums an honest listen, you would find out that, hey, there's a lot of great stuff out there. But I mean, history is littered with trends that explode and then die. You had your disco, you had your pop punk, you had your grunge, you had your Korn, Limp Bizkit era, the rap rock, and all of those bands exploded and then they all died. And I'm sure there's fans just like you and I that right now are still anxiously awaiting the next Limp Bizkit album. And
I saw Limp Bizkit at Mohegan Sun just about a year and a half ago. There's video of me stage diving. So I mean, I'm a fan of that stuff too. I'm actually very different, I would say, from a guy like Eddie Trunk, in that it's like he likes this, not just one genre, but it's like he's rock and roll and that's it, nothing else. I love all different types of things, but
Sure.
80s rock and the rock that, he always says derogatorily gets lumped into hair metal, which I don't feel that way. It's a fun celebratory genre. And no matter, I've gone to so many shows of different genres, but it wasn't until I got into seeing those shows, and actually the first of which was Vince Neil in 2003 here on Long Island. At that point, it was like, I get it. There's just such a fun vibe that you could not replicate that you still get when you see these bands today.
It really bothered me when the grunge bands came out and then people started saying things about hair metal like, oh, they're not real. They don't sing about real topics. Well, you know what? Nirvana and Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains, they were never going to be able to write a fun party song. But the bands that I loved, hey, they could write a heartbreaking ballad. They could write about an awesome party. They could write about things so I felt, if anything, they were a little bit more real than, they could cover all of those topics. And to me, that was real life. I mean, sometimes, in the mid 90s, I was in my early 20s, I was getting my heart broken. And then I had great times where I was partying with my friends. And then, you had the times where you're like, shit, what am I doing with my life? And I felt like those bands could cover all of that. Whereas with the grunge bands, you really only got the despair. You got, the depression and, my family life was fucked up. Well, you know what? My family life was fucked up too. It got better, but my dad abandoned us. I never heard from my dad when I was a kid. My stepdad had a really bad drinking problem when I was younger. And I didn't want to dwell on that. And post note, my stepdad ended up quitting drinking when I was 14, became this great guy. But, yes, I understood that. Hey, there's a lot of bad in the world, but, I didn't want to focus on that. I didn't want to just give in and say, oh, you know what? The world sucks. And 80s rock could give you the highs and give you the lows, which is like real life.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're wearing a Kiss shirt, because to me, Paul Stanley has always been indicative of that. Like when you watch the live shows, he'll always say, like, we're here to escape the world. We're not here to make the world a better place or change the world. There's so many videos you could find on YouTube of that. And to me, that is why I love the genre. Actually, I'm sure you've read The Dirt, right?
Oh, yeah.
So one of the standout things in that book that I always remember is Motley Crue in 1994 did a very uncomfortable interview on MTV that you can now find on YouTube. At the time when I read the book, you couldn't, but it's described in there how, I don't know if it was Kurt Loder. Yeah, you know what interview I'm talking about though, right? Where they walked off. Was it Kurt Loder?
I think it may have been.
Yeah, it was someone. We could be wrong on that, but it was definitely MTV News. And they said something to the band to the effect of, oh, so you guys aren't doing songs anymore about hairspray, fire, and girls. And they were almost embarrassed at that time because it wasn't cool anymore. And they said, like, we were never all about that. And then they played some montage of all the videos that had that. And Vince Neil in The Dirt says, I would have handled that situation totally differently, because if they said that to me, I would have said, yeah, I'm all about the hairspray, the fire, and the girls, and it's a hell of a lot cooler than being about nothing.
Right. I just saw 5 minutes ago on Twitter, Ultimate Classic Rock shared something where a member of the band Europe of, the Final Countdown, said how he hated the 80s and he hated, wearing the spandex and all that. And that really bothers me because number one, a lot of us loved that era. Yeah. Did we dress goofy? Of course, but it was also super fun. I mean, people nowadays, I've taught English for the last 12 years, and there are so many kids who go, what was it like to grow up in the 80s? And they're just jealous of having to have gone through that time. So I like, Vince's attitude was, hey, why deny what we were? It was awesome. And I get that in the mid 90s, a lot of people were running away from that because it wasn't, I was a college freshman when Nevermind came out. So I experienced it as it was happening, hair metal falling off a cliff. I mean, it wasn't a it didn't seem like a short, it was like boom and it was gone. So there were a lot of bands, and even, you know, I'm a huge Warrant fan, and I admittedly, will admit that those mid 90s albums, Ultraphobic and Belly to Belly,
which
did
I will note are right behind you for those watching
are
on YouTube.
right. So yeah, I need to show people. My house actually looks like a hair metal museum.
I
So
love
anyway,
it.
but you know, those they did try to jump on the bandwagon, and I get it. You know, you want to stay relevant, you want to stay popular. But I was glad when it finally came around where bands could admit, like, hey, it was a great time, and I'm not ashamed of what we did. So you know, it took a while, but we ended up getting there.
Yeah, I mean, I could see why bands ran away from it. Like, are you familiar with Pantera's glam past? Did they call it
Oh,
glam Tara?
oh, absolutely.
So I love a lot of that music, a lot of their older albums, but
Right.
they knew that if they spoke about that as they were number one on Billboard charts, they would be dead. Like it was embarrassing to have those photos out
Oh,
there.
totally.
And I've even read interviews where, they talk where at the time they were asking Dimebag Darrell about, he went from Diamond Darrell to Dimebag Darrell, and the band was pissed. He was always Dimebag. That
Right.
was a misprint. And we all know that that's bullshit. But at the same time, I understand that bands like that, in order to keep their credibility, they kind of had to hide. And a lot of those 90s bands lit Alice in Chains. A lot of these bands started on the glam scene,
Oh,
and they
right.
just knew that when they blew up, it was uncool, and they covered it up like it was a scandal.
But very few of those bands didn't have some kind of hair metal past. I mean, Lane Staley, there's stuff on YouTube where he's glammed up to the nines. And, you know, when you mentioned Pantera, I do think that Daryl always was pretty open about his love of bands like Van Halen and things like that. There's actually a really cool concert. It's at some festival. I think it's in Italy, and Warrant's playing there, and they're on a bill with Pantera. And that is a really awkward pairing. But here comes Dimebag Darrell out in the middle of Warrant's set with a bottle of Jägermeister.
That
And I'm
is
like,
cool.
you know, that guy seemed like just such a big fan of music that he was going to be like, screw it. I'm going to go on stage with Warrant, where a lot of people, even if they liked Warrant, would have said, like, stay away, don't acknowledge it, pretend that we have nothing to do with that. And, so that bothers me. But there are guys, like Daryl, that were pretty open about their love of that kind of music. And I always respected that.
Yeah, and things do come around with that too. In that, I think a lot of those bands, when Pantera blew up, were trying to be Pantera. Because you listen to
Oh,
Motley Crue 1994, I feel like if you listen to a song like "Smoke the Sky," Tommy Lee is doing his best. Vinnie Paul on the drums, I definitely feel like, and
totally.
we've even talked about some of the more obscure bands. Wow, who am I thinking of now? Their name is Shotgun Messiah. I've seen interviews with them where at the very time that Second Coming album came out was the time where Pantera were blowing up the charts, and they were trying to stray from their hair metal image a little bit.
Yep.
And you can find it on YouTube somewhere. They were asked about one of their ballads, and they were like, yeah, but it's not like one of these glam ballads. This is kind of like a Pantera ballad, like Cemetery Gates, because I think they saw what was happening, and
Sure.
they knew that there was just a new era coming in. And yeah, I think a lot of those bands wanted to be Pantera, changed the image completely. At the time, the Pantera was cool, and they just went on stage with, a snapback hat and basketball shorts, and it was no longer cool to wear makeup or anything, hot pink or anything like that.
Yeah. And if there was a band that I thought was gonna survive, I thought it was gonna be Skid Row. Their debut, sells 5 million copies, and then I thought they struck the perfect balance of
Yes.
heaviness, but still, maintaining. They had ballads, they had straight ahead rock on their follow-up, Slave to the Grind. It debuted at #1 on Billboard, and I love that album. So I thought, you know what, this is a band that's gonna be able to survive. But then in '95, they come out with Subhuman Race, and a lot of people forget they toured with Pantera, and I saw that show in Fargo, and I had no clue who Pantera was. This is 1992. I'm like, fucking Pantera, what? Why don't you have like stage dolls or something, opening? Well, anyway, obviously Pantera leapfrogs them, but then Subhuman Race to me is them trying to be Pantera. It failed miserably, and like I said, I mean, I get people saying, I want to stay relevant. I have to change with the times. Nobody knew back then what was going to happen. You just knew that the bands, all the bands, all your compadres that you came up with were dying, and you're like, okay, well, hey, maybe if we do a Pantera album, it'll work for us, and it didn't. But yeah, so many of those. I think Shotgun Messiah, the album after Second Coming, Violent New Breed, was
They were doing like an industrial type thing, right? And
Totally.
that's the same thing as Faster Pussycat kind of did.
Faster Pussycat did the same thing.
Yeah.
And I loved the early Shotgun Messiah and Second Coming. I think you mentioned that the other day. It did get heavier, but it struck the right balance. But then they abandoned any semblance of their old sound, and how did that work out? Not very well.
Yeah, because people still know it's the same name. You put out albums under that name. Pantera weren't a signed band, so they were able to get away with it because before Cowboys from Hell, they were a local band.
Yep.
You were talking about Subhuman Race. By any chance, did you hear when it was pretty recent, Sebastian Bach was on Eddie Trunk and he talked about the production of that album?
I don't know if I heard that, but I've listened to so many interviews about that. So go ahead.
Yeah, what he said was kind of interesting because this is at least how he explained it. Because Eddie Trunk loves Subhuman Race, he's said. And I don't think Sebastian Bach is the biggest fan of it the way that he was speaking about it. And he said at the time we got Bob Rock on as the producer because he was like, I can't do a Sebastian Bach. We fucking love Dr. Feelgood, man. So that's why he said they brought on Bob Rock. And he said at the time, Bob Rock
had also done Metallica's Black Album.
Yes, but he says that at the time, Bob Rock, and I do have Metallica there, but he said that Bob Rock kept talking about the stuff he was doing with Veruca Salt, and it was something that he kept focusing on. And this band Veruca Salt's going to be huge. And Sebastian Bach was saying, but what about Dr. Feelgood, bro? That's what we're trying to sound like. So he made it sound like Bob Rock pushed them in a direction that they really didn't want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I believe that. Like I said, I mean, they went out with Pantera, and so I felt like, and obviously Slave to the Grind was so much harder than the debut. So, production might have had something to do with that, but all of those riffs were screaming, we are going to be the heaviest. I reviewed that album in one of my videos. I reviewed all the Skid Row albums.
I saw it. I'm a hair metal Haven super fan.
I just kept saying it is so fucking heavy, but not in a good way. I mean, just brutally heavy. I don't get into, I like heavy metal. I like old school Metallica, but that Subhuman Race album was, the songs just, the melody wasn't there. It was heavy for the sake of heavy. So who's to blame? I mean, nobody wants to take responsibility for that, because that album, was, when it came out, a lot of people were still like, hey, Skid Row still, is going to be one of those bands that climbs the mountain. But once that album died, then it became pretty obvious that they were falling, by the wayside along with everybody else. And Sebastian ended up getting fired about a year later.
Yeah. So I could imagine what seeing these shows was like in the heyday, in the 80s, late 80s, even very early 90s, when this was cool. These were arena bands. This is what the world was listening to. I wonder, from your perspective, and I'd like to know, what was it like when the venues were getting smaller and smaller, the crowds were getting smaller? Like, were there bands that seemed to not care and they enjoyed doing this? Or was it ever apparent from the bands that they were just like, what is going on here? Were they uncomfortable on stage? I'd love to know that.
So I saw most of those bands at some point when they were big, and then at some point when they were playing the smaller clubs. The one that I saw the most and actually got to spend some time with, and you mentioned my Janie Lane video, was Warrant. They were constantly playing around. I live in Fargo. They were constantly playing around Fargo and Minneapolis. I had some friends that were big fans, and we just tended to go see them all the time. I have a couple Warrant songs. I Saw Red tattooed on my arm, and another song from Ultraphobic, Stronger Now, somewhere. So those tattoos ended up getting us, on the tour bus or backstage. And so the one thing that I can really attest to with Warrant was the amount. They were always a big drinking band, but a lot more alcohol on stage. And when you hear guys like Eric Turner and Joey Allen, if you see, interviews on YouTube, they'll talk about that being a dark, dark time. And I don't doubt it. I mean, they were awesome in concert, and Janie Lane would drink so many shots, but he was still at the point where it didn't affect his performance. You could tell he was drunk, but he still hit all the notes. Obviously, when things got dramatically worse in the early and mid 2000s, then there's a lot of video evidence that it had gone beyond his control, where it was affecting his performances. But you see videos where I was just watching a concert from like 95 or 96. Somebody in the crowd buys him a shot, and he's like, of course I'm going to take this shot. I might do 20 fucking shots tonight. But he's still on.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing him at a really small bar in Fargo, like a biker bar. And this wasn't even like a club. It was like a bar, where it was on a solo tour. And I didn't get, it's not like I always got backstage or always got on the bus. But a friend of mine who worked for a radio station got on the bus after the show, and he said that Janie Lane told him that after a concert, he'll drink until like 9 a.m. and sleep all day, and then get up and start drinking and then do the show. And that's kind of obvious to see in, when you hear stories about the downfall. So back to your point about what were bands like in the mid 90s. I think when they were on stage, it still looked like they were having a good time. It wasn't like they were standing there and going, fuck, this sucks. But you would see moments, like you would see, like if you caught them off stage, or if you found a way to talk to them, the excitement wasn't there. It was more like, okay, this is my job now, and I have to do this. So yes, I do appreciate you coming to the show, but man, it was so much more fun when, we were filling stadiums. So, and I legitimately, like, I try to convey this in my videos, like, I legitimately felt bad. I was like, man, if they're playing this club, I hope that it's sold out, so this band knows that, hey, a lot of us, you still do matter, even though there's only 1,000 people here, like us 1,000, like, we genuinely love this band and this music. And I think a lot of bands did feel that, but who doesn't miss the good times?
And I think you may have a different perspective too, because of where you are in North Dakota. Because if they were drawing 1,000 in North Dakota, I would be willing to bet, and you could probably find video evidence of it, they were drawing like under 100 where I am in New York. And
Sure.
That's indicative of Pauly Shore. Actually, this is, different thing, but Pauly Shore put out a documentary about this, and he talks about how he's playing the middle of nowhere, Wisconsin, and it's not Green Bay, Wisconsin. It's some town you've never heard of. And they ask him why he does this. And he's like, look, I'm old news if I play LA or New York. No one gives a shit. He's like, if I go to these remote towns, they're like, we can't believe someone so famous is here. So I've seen that myself as a fan of different bands. There's bands that I've seen on a tour where they'll play New York City, and the crowd is literally a couple dozen people. And then I've seen that same band on that same tour in rural Pennsylvania, and they pack the house out. So there's actually a difference in terms of that too.
Absolutely. And I think, so the Midwest, how bands will talk about how Detroit is such a
Like the band on your
struggle.
shirt.
I mean, like, you know, you have Detroit Rock City, but even like bands like Warrant and those 80s rock bands, for some reason, they go to Detroit and they play to a few thousand people instead of 500. And I feel like that's, you know, we're in the upper Midwest. There's not a lot going on in Fargo, North Dakota. The weather sucks. So I think you bring up a great point, is that when there is a show like that, you know, you get the diehards, and you get probably some of the better crowds. That, so I think bands are appreciative of that. And you know, I mentioned that Warrant would play so many shows around here, and that probably just says something about, hey, like, we're able to sell tickets there, so let's keep booking shows there because it's working.
Yeah, I mean, it's true. I could just tell you, as someone who's lived in New York my whole life, other than, you know, last year I lived in Connecticut, that's not too far, and I've lived in Philadelphia for a year. The truth is, in the surrounding area, I could see a rock show every single night of the week. And by rock show, I mean I could see a major label band of some variety in rock
Right.
every night of the week. So
Right.
you have to stand out in order to draw a crowd, no matter
Yeah.
what era.
Yeah. I don't know how the hell you live in New York. Is Ocasio-Cortez one of your congresswomen?
No,
We don't
mine
need to
is
get political.
no, mine is even more embarrassing though on the right. My congressman is George Santos, the guy whose entire background is a lie.
Right. Yeah.
So I mean, there are definitely embarrassments in Congress on the left and the right.
Oh,
I would say he is on the right, and he is the biggest embarrassment. I've talked about it on the show that usually we in New York will look at somewhere like where you are, and we're like, how did the people in North Dakota elect this moron? But I'm now in the district where it's like we elected a guy whose entire background is a lie.
Right.
So yeah, no, I do get your point. There's positives and negatives to living in New York. And actually, as I'm talking about the 90s thing though, and you have Ultraphobic behind you, I do love that album. And one thing I noticed that I'm sure you noticed, the title track, Ultraphobic, the lyrics seem to very much talk about that if people listen to it, where it's Janie Wayne saying, I mean, I don't have it quoted in front of me right here, but he's like, I used to have a schedule. Now I just stay up all night. And I think, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that the opening riff sounds like Smells Like Teen Spirit. I think it's a reference to that. And it's basically saying like, yeah, I used to be in demand and I never saw this coming, that our band would not be cool anymore.
Sure. And I said in my Janie Lane video, you know, you could see how his life was going and progressing with each album. I mean, the first two albums are so upbeat, and then Dog Eat Dog starts to get a little bit darker. There's still some positive, some fun, you know, party songs, but then there's songs like All My Bridges Are Burning. And then you get to Ultraphobic, and it's a dark and desperate album. You know, I quoted now, I Undertow. He's talking about how he's been pulled in by the undertow and he just can't escape. And you know, Ultraphobic. There is very little positivity in that album. And when you look at Janie Lane's downfall, and you know, you see a guy who's falling apart in front of you, and he's writing the lyrics as he's doing it, and you can follow it, because Belly to Belly is even, there's some good moments on Belly to Belly, but then there's songs on there where I think this guy is really, he's losing it. And you know, it's no surprise that came out in 96. That was the last, I mean, he didn't die until 2011, but that was the last Warrant album that they put out. He did put out a solo album called Back Down to One that you know, nothing really stuck with me.
And he had a side project with a few other, like, I think Carlos Cavazo, right?
Saints of the Underground with Bobby Blotzer from Rat, and there was a couple other guys. I think Carrie Kelly was in that band, and that was a decent album. But you know, the guy was everybody acknowledges that the guy was such a talented songwriter, and even the stuff that he was writing that was grunge sounding, I mean, it was better grunge than most grunge bands were doing. But you know, so part of my story is that I had a really bad alcohol problem. You know, I dropped out of college. You know, as his life was falling apart, so was mine. I dropped out of college in 96. I worked as a bartender from 96 to 2003 and gained like 90 pounds and smoked and drank to oblivion. Well, I mean, that's what was happening to him as well. So you know, for whatever you know, so I related, man. I mean, those
Yeah.
albums just you know, each album I was like, yeah, I shit, things suck now. And so I'm right there with you, brother. And some of the nights where I did get pulled backstage and they'd be feeding me tequila and I wouldn't remember what happened, you know, and at the time I'm like, oh, that was so awesome. You know, here Eric Turner is coming over to the side of the stage and giving me his glass of tequila. But then I look back later and I'm like, wait a minute, to play a show, Eric Turner had to have a glass of tequila on ice to get through a show. I mean, could that have been really that great of a time? So you know, like, so I as Janie Lane was falling apart, so was I. I just
Yeah.
got lucky that, you know, I ended up deploying to Iraq in 2003, and for whatever reason, being over there and kind of being forced into some sobriety, but also going, you know what, if I don't make it home from here, um, I never accomplished anything that I thought, you know, I thought I was going to do all this great stuff. I was going to teach and coach, and here, you know, I'm a college dropout bartender. And so if I hadn't gone to Iraq, you know, I might be Janie Lane, just the not famous version, the guy who dies of alcoholism in his mid 40s.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to get into all that, and I'm sure the audience wants to hear your military stuff. But I will tell you one thing, you know, because I just have to, as we're on this topic. I did get to see Janie Lane one time. I am not a big fan of award ceremonies and that type of thing. And it was the same night for my college radio station. They had some type of yearly award thing. So this was 2005 or 2006. It was either 05 or 06. And instead of going to that, I went with my best friend Steve to Mulcahy's on Long Island and saw Janie Lane. And the biggest thing going on with Janie Lane at the time, which you'll probably remember, is he was on VH1's Celebrity Fit Club. That was the big thing for him. And it was kind of sad in a way, in that he seemed fine. It was a great performance. But once again, Long Island on a weeknight, it was, if I had to guess, maybe 40 to 50 people there.
Yeah.
And it was a great performance though, man. And I had a great time. But yeah, there definitely is that feeling of, all right, this is, as I said, 05, 06. In the back of his mind, he has to be thinking 13 years ago, I was playing arenas. Where did I go wrong?
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. And it's, you know, it's sad. But some people can accept that.
Sure.
You know, that there's a lot of bands.
There's a lot of bands who I could tell love it. And when I see LA Guns, no matter how big the audience or small, they seem to love it up there and give a great performance.
Right. And, you know, so Mark Kendall from Great White is also a guy who is sober. And I'm not somebody who preaches sobriety. I mean, you got to do what works for you. But, you know, I think he struggled to get over, you know, the fall. But once he got his life on track, hey, you can go, you know what? It's not that bad. I still play music for a living.
Yeah.
You know, still probably make decent music or decent money compared to the, you know, the average, you know, guy off the street. And, you know, I get to travel around and play shows. It's not that bad. But Janie Lane, you know, obvious, he could never get to that point. And, you know, I mean, if most everybody's seen the video where he's just wasted and he's talking about cherry pie, and I could shoot myself in the fucking head for writing that song. I mean, you know, that was a huge song, and a lot of people love that. And instead of
it's like a strip club anthem forever.
Yeah. Instead of saying like, hey, you know what? I wrote something that is going to last. And he wrote many other songs that were not cherry. You know, I Saw Red, Uncle Tom's Cabin.
Everyone knows Heaven. Even if people listening to this think they don't know Warrant, if they heard Heaven, they'll go, I remember that song.
Absolutely. And, you know, he's just one of those guys that could never that he never came to terms with where his life went. And if he had, I think he was never going to be a big rock star again, but he could have been somebody who wrote songs for other people.
Yeah,
You know, I could see him writing ballads for country artists
I
that would
agree.
have been, you know, so he could have had that kind of career, but you know, sadly it didn't happen.
Yeah, the thing that I do enjoy going to those shows, and to this day that I still do, of the smaller bands, it's like, so we have Metallica back there. I saw Metallica recently at Giant Stadium, right? Completely packed, center stage. It is the biggest crowd of people I have ever seen in my life, and it was electric. It was a great time, but there's something about, to compare that, I just saw a band I just mentioned, LA Guns in Connecticut, at a very small club in Norwalk. But the thing is, I have more of a connection with the people I tend to meet and talk with at those shows, because they are diehard. If you're at an LA Gun show in 2023, as they already reunited years ago, chances are you're diehard and you live for this music, and you're not just there because it's a party and this is the big thing happening in town. So like, those are the people I love meeting as fans at those shows, because like, I know that all this other music has come along in the past 30 years, and yet this is still the music that speaks to you.
Oh, my favorite, when I think of favorite shows in my life, I think back to those small club shows. Again, I feel bad that the band wishes it was a huge place, but those were the shows where, you know, yeah, everyone that you met was like, fuck, I always see you at, you know, a
Yeah.
Warrant and LA Guns. You know, you're at every one, like you're a diehard like I am. So I've met really close friends at shows like those. Yeah, big shows are fun, but you know, you come out of it, you know, did you really meet a diehard fan, or was it just, you know, everybody else that goes because Metallica's famous? And you know, and speaking of bands like Metallica, I mean, you know, James Hetfield has had so many addiction problems, so it's not as if being famous and having tons of money automatically makes it so, you know what, I have no problems, like everything is just always awesome because my band sells millions of records. I mean, you know, poor drunks and rich drunks pass out the same way.
Yeah, no one is immune to the trials and tribulations of life. I hope you're enjoying this interview with Anthony Bryant as much as I enjoyed conducting it. Before we continue, the best ammo on the planet is Fort Scott Munitions. You guys know this. Fort Scott is a manufacturer of multi-federal patented solid copper and brass CNC spun ammunition that is designed to tumble upon impact in soft tissue, leaving devastating wound channels for faster bleed out and quicker incapacitation. This ammunition was originally developed to innovate and improve on the standard of military-grade ammunition design. It was found that not only did the TUI ammunition outperform competitors in the self-defense industry, but it quickly became apparent that it would be a top contender for hunters alike. With the ammunition being CNC spun, the tolerances are some of the tightest on the market, ensuring that you receive the same results with each pull of the trigger. Fort Scott Munitions is available throughout privately owned businesses in all 50 states, or you get the best deal through us when you go to fsm.com and you use the promo code BATTLELINE. That's fsm.com, promo code BATTLELINE for 15% off your order. Only available to listeners of the Battleline podcast. Fort Scott Munitions is a proud supporter of Chris Peranto, Battleline Tactical, and the Battleline podcast. And hey, if you're shooting with Fort Scott Munitions and you purchased because of us, tag us on Instagram and let us know what you think. From Battleline Podcast at Battleline Podcast on Instagram, at Battleline Pod on Twitter, or X as we call it, or as we call it now. And we'll put that stuff out there on our story or retweet it out, because we love when you guys support our sponsors. If you're looking for the best night vision out there, look no further than Photonis Defense. Now you can have the superpower to see in the dark with the Viper Binocular Night Vision System by Photonis Defense, which is the global leader in night vision solutions, providing more high-quality night vision capabilities than anyone. Military, law enforcement, and public safety end users utilize Photonis Defense solutions to give them the edge at night in tactical situations and rescue operations. Hunters, shooters, boaters, and enthusiasts can rely on the Photonis Defense Viper Binocular to become masters of darkness. The new Viper binocular system carries the same features and benefits as the Photonis Defense Viper monocular with a ruggedized body and harnesses the power of the Echo Intensifier tubes, giving you sharper images, reduced halo, and industry-leading ultra-fast auto-gating across the range of dynamic operating conditions. Visit photonisdefense.com for more information or look for Photonis Defense product options from your night vision dealer. That's PHOTONIS defense.com. And now let's get back to our interview. I appreciate you guys not skipping through the reads. Our sponsors are how we keep going, so your support of them means the world. With that, let's get right back to this interview. Yeah, I definitely want to get into what you were just speaking of before, and it's a lot of what the audience would probably want to know. So actually, what you had a long military career. What is the time frame that you joined?
So I did 2 years of high school. I graduated from high school in 1991. I did 2 years of college. I gained a bunch of weight. I partied my ass off. My grades sucked. And after 2 years of college, I was like, man, I need to do something. Like, I'm going nowhere. Well, my brother was in the Guard, and he said, man, he goes, join the Guard. He goes, you'll get into shape. It'll help you. You'll be more disciplined. So I joined and I went to basic training in the summer of 93 as a specialist combat medic. And for a couple of years, I was really disciplined. I worked out, and after, my grades in college shot up. But then I slowly started regressing, and I don't know if you got to, but yeah. So the summer of 93 is January of 93 is when I officially joined.
And I'm wondering, because when you think National Guard, I think people think, okay, this is a less hardcore choice to make than someone like Chris, who I work with, who decided to be an Army Ranger. So did you ever imagine you were going to deploy to war zones?
No. And when I joined, I mean, the National Guard very rarely did anything. So, so I joined in 93, I deployed in 2003. So for those 10 years, I mean, it wasn't like I didn't brag about being a soldier, because it was like, oh, you're National Guard, like you're not even really in the military, is kind of how you felt about it. Even the people who served. So, no, I never envisioned going anywhere. And when we got activated in January of 2003, we never envisioned that we'd be in Iraq. We thought we'd be pulling airport duty in Hawaii or something, and when we ended up going to Kuwait, and we're in Kuwait, and they go, all right, in a week we're heading into the middle of Iraq, and we're like, holy shit, like this is for real. So no, I never envisioned going anywhere, but it ended up that we went right into the heart of the battle. So
was that scary to you? Because so many of the guys I have on the podcast are Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and they will tell you they live for this. So when they hear that they were going to be deployed and they were going to go into war, their reaction is very different than what mine would be as a civilian. They're like, yeah, we're finally doing this. This is what we trained for. And to them, it's not even necessarily about what the mission is, the politics. They don't really care. They join the military to be deployed and to go into war, because this is just the personality type of the guy who joined special operations. What was your mind state?
So I was not like that. I was never a hardcore soldier. It was more like, hey, I want to get in shape, to help me pay for college. That's why I am very patriotic, but initially I was not some big hardcore soldier. But I wasn't scared when we went over, because to be honest, my life had fallen so when in high school, I was a good athlete, I was a good student, I was very confident. I thought, you know what, I'm going to go out and I'm going to dominate life. I'm going to go out and get a great degree. I'm going to have some awesome job. I thought I was thinking about going into sports broadcasting. I thought, you know what, I'll probably be famous one day. And my life fell so far that from 1991, when I graduated high school, till December of 2002, a couple weeks before, I was so depressed. I worked 20 hours a week as a bartender. I slept all day. So my daughter was little back then. I was a horrible father. I would wake up and give her some cereal and then sleep on the couch because I was hungover. My girlfriend at the time, my daughter's mother, we're not together now. She's a great person. We're good friends, but she would come home from work at 4:30. I would go to my job as a bartender, get done at about 9, drink until 2 or 3, and it was just a never ending. And so I was so miserable that when I went to Iraq, it was like, what? This isn't any worse. So in fact, I remember a lot of people that I was with, saying like, this doesn't seem to bother you. Like, people who were they hated it and they were desperate to go home. And I was like, fuck, like, hey, I haven't drank in 2 weeks. Like I actually feel pretty good. Like, all right, what's next? So I changed a lot over the course of that year and became, I used to be a soldier that everybody would have said, like, you can't really count on him to do anything. But he's a pretty funny guy to have around. I was mainly known for my sense of humor. I like to joke around, but
Probably talking about 80s hair metal.
probably talking about 80s hair metal. And so as the time, as everything went on, I was like, oh my God, like I'm starting to feel like I remember feeling once before. Like I have confidence, like I can do things. Like I'm a pretty good soldier. So I was only an E4. I was very low ranking. But as I was there longer and I was, as I was farther away from the alcohol and, we had a lot of downtime when we weren't on missions. So I started working out and I was losing weight. So I actually got to the point where when we were getting ready to go home, I was nervous to go home. Like I was so like, okay, I know I want to stay like this, but I wasn't ready to commit to not drinking when I got home. So actually I volunteered to stay late. We had to have like 30. I was in a battalion of like 700. They asked for like 30 or whatever, 40 volunteers to stay another month and clean equipment and turn in equipment. So me and another buddy of mine both volunteered to stay because I was like, hey man, I was almost tempted, they wouldn't let you stay and do another tour, but there was another North Dakota group going in. And I was like, maybe I should stay for another year. Well, it turns out you couldn't do that. So I was nervous to go home because I think I kind of knew that I was going to lose whatever I had gained. And I did. I got home and things fell apart.
So do you would you say that you were an alcoholic? Because the fact is you were able to just go there and it sounds like cold turkey, be like, I'm done with this.
That's a great question. I don't feel like I wasn't somebody who had to drink in the morning. When I left, I didn't go, like I didn't have the shakes and things, but I was a drinker. I probably drank 4 or 5 nights a week. And every time I drank to get polluted. I blacked, at the end, I blacked out most of the time when I would wake up and be like, did I drive home? I don't know. But it, I didn't drink every day. I didn't wake up in the morning and need a drink. So was I physically addicted? No, but I was also the kind of person who, if I didn't drink for a day, I started to get like, I'm really bored, and I would just get like, man, I just want to, so then at most I would miss 2 days. And a lot of that would be, I would feel so guilty. If I came home at 4 a.m. and my girlfriend would be like, so I would feel guilty. I would not drink for a day or two, but a day or two was the most. And then suddenly you're like, okay, it's time. So physically addicted, maybe not, but mentally, was it something that I really depended on? Yes.
But what type of stuff did you see during those combat deployments?
You know what? We got so lucky. In my battalion of 700, we were gone for 16 months. We never lost a person. But I got into country, into Iraq in the middle of April. And so I was a combat medic. So I was on the road a lot, and that's where all the bad stuff happened. For the first month and a half or 2 months, it was clean sailing. Like we would bring, you know, a boom box and put batteries in it and leave and put our weapons in the back seat. And everybody that we met on the roads were like, yeah, USA. And then it was July 4th of 03 was the first time. So we were having some sort of celebration, and suddenly there's explosions, and we're like, what the? We never been shot at, nothing had ever happened. And all of a sudden we're all like taking off for our tents, and you're like, what the? Well, it was mortar rounds. It was the first night mortar rounds were being lobbed into the base. And this is a big base. I mean, there's probably 10,000 of us. It was called LSA Anaconda, LSA Logistics and Support, right by the town of Balad, Iraq, about 40 miles north of Baghdad. But right after that, so that was July 4th. July 15th was the first time that anybody from North Dakota was killed in action. And on that day, I was on a convoy. So we were engineer battalion. So we were building roads and schools and putting, you know, latrines at the bases and things like that. So we were traveling to all these different places. Well, we were in Baghdad, and we get this call like, hey, this unit from Bismarck, and they're really close to us. They're not in the same unit, but they're really close to us. They're like, hey, these guys just got hit. You got to go pick them up. And we didn't even know what that meant. Like, what do you mean got hit? So we drive 2 hours out of our way, and we're all pissed off. We're like, son of a bitch, you know, we wanted to go back to Balad. We get to this place, and they're all these people from, it was the 957. They were a bridge company, and they had been attacked outside of this place called Aramadi. Like 5,000 rounds went off in like 20 minutes. One guy died. His name is John Fettig. Another guy lost his arm. And that was the first time we saw these people, and everybody had, you know, they call it the 1,000-yard stare. They were just like, you could tell they'd been crying, and now they were just staring off into space. And we're all like, what happened? And that was the first day where the war became real. You know, for the first 2 months, it was almost like, yeah, okay, we're just here, and it's, you know, okay, we're going to be here for a year. And then suddenly, now every time we're on a convoy, we're M16s out the window. We're not playing music. You're, you know, oh, a vehicle's trying to pass, you know, and so it became real. So I saw a lot of violence. I saw a lot of vehicles that had been detonated by IEDs. That Bismarck unit ended up having another time where they got attacked, and they lost 2 more people. We got fired at frequently, but like I said, you know, nobody, I never had to fix somebody who got shot. I never had to fix somebody who got a limb blown off. You know, I like to think that we were good, that we knew what we were looking, but really we were just lucky.
How did it impact you psychologically to go through all that?
I've always told people that, you know, a lot of good came from me going to Iraq. You know, I got home, and after a couple of months of everything falling apart, I finally quit drinking. I went back to college, but I know, like, I've changed a lot. Like, I used to be so much more like I'm a pretty outgoing person. Like, I like people, but nowadays I'm so much more reclusive. I very rarely go out, and I'm not as big, you know, I love concerts, but I'm not big on crowds anymore. And so I know that there's things that have changed me for the worse. Like, I've never been like for some reason, relationships, my relationships never last. I don't, maybe that's not Iraq, but I just
Maybe they go to your house and they see the hair metal shrine,
and they're like,
this guy's a little weird.
40 pictures of poison up in the wall, so don't call me, I'll call you. That's very possible. But yeah, I just have become so much more of a loner, and I'll be honest, that bothers me, because I used to be just the life of the party, and hey, wherever something's going on, you know, I want to go. But nowadays I'm always like trying to think of a reason not to go to things. And so, yeah, I think, you know, there's a lot of people that, even if they weren't in specific, like, you know, the blood and guts of combat. A lot of people will say that you can't drive around a country for a year on super high alert,
Yeah.
constantly tense, and not have that do something to you. And I so
Yeah, I would say though, with where your life is at now as both a teacher and a coach, at least from the surface, it seems like you have a pretty well balanced life, because you're not some guy who's just working from home, as many people are, get no human interaction. I mean, you have to deal
let me
with
correct
people all day
something.
long.
So I'm not teaching this year.
Okay.
I taught the last 12 years, and I resigned from my last teaching job. I'm working now. I coach basketball, so I work at a it's like a training academy for basketball.
Okay.
And then I'm coaching girls basketball at a local high school. And so, when you mention that, like, yes, I from the outside, and don't let me, I don't want people to think, oh, poor Anthony Bryant, that guy's life is, no, it's, my life is very, I'm sober, I have done a lot of successful things. So but does a part of me think that maybe, my desire to be alone, is that part of the reason that I left teaching? I don't know. Teaching is a very different profession than it used to be. I'm very old school. I love my students, but I also, am kind of a disciplinarian, and many schools and parents are not. So I've never had a lot of problems, but just, you can maybe imagine how teaching has changed. And I just see things where I'm like, you know what? I'm not comfortable with the direction it's going. So I may go back to teaching, but I said, you know what? I'm gonna take a year. I'm gonna live off basketball. And to be honest, the stuff that you see on my walls, I have a little side business where I frame and sell old music ads. And so my garage probably has 1,000 framed things all over the walls and in totes. And I go to like music shows. There's October 21st in Fargo, the Fargo, no, what the hell's it called? The Fargo Record something. Now I can't remember the name of it, but anyway, I have a booth there. I sell things on the Facebook marketplace, and that was just a way for me to stay involved with music. I love framing. I love meeting fans of this type of music. And
Sure.
so I have a Facebook page. People will message me and go, hey, do you have anything from Queen? And I go, oh, here's 3 pictures, and they'll stop by and pick up stuff. So anyway, so I'm not teaching this year, and I know I kind of got off track here, but
No, that's fine.
I'm coaching basketball, and I love, so I love working with kids, and I love to use my story of the military and getting over alcohol, and I've always told any school that I'm like, hey, if you're comfortable with me going to talk to students about how my life kind of fell apart and came back, I'm always willing to do that, because that's when I got sober. I said, you know what, I'm going to use this to hopefully help other people. So I taught English. It's not like I loved English, I really love to read, but the main reason I taught was just to be somebody that could hopefully steer some kids in the right direction.
That's cool. So at what point do you feel like it all clicked that you were turning things around, as you said, got back in shape, got a job at the time as a teacher, or were on the road to getting that job, got sober? Like, what was there a certain moment where you said, I got to turn this around, or turn this thing around, to quote Van Halen?
Yeah. So, okay. So like I said, when I was in Iraq, I knew, I was like, wow, I feel really good. And I told myself, when I go home, I'm going to go back to college. I'm going to be a much better father, and I'm going to cut down on my drinking. Well, when I got home, what I realized is I'm not good at moderation, and got home, and immediately, the first night I got home, I drank so much. We were in Colorado, got back from Iraq, and drank so much I threw up. And 2 months later, at the end of June, June of 2004, I was right back to where I was before I left. And it was, so yes, there is a moment. I woke up, it was like approximately June 28th. And I woke up, it's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's beautiful out, 80 degrees out, sunny. And I am hung over, and I have all the shades drawn, and I felt like I was going to have a nervous breakdown. Like I was shaking and I was crying, and I was like, what if that didn't get my life straight? And then nothing will. Like, this is how I'm going to die. And I felt like I was going to lose it. And I was like, you know what? I have to do something. So that day I opened up the yellow pages. This is before I had a cell phone. Opened up the yellow pages, and I was like, treatment. And I called the place, and they said, yep, come on in. And I went in, and they went through, they're like, yep, we think you should go into treatment. And I said, okay, but there's a concert going on this weekend in Botno, North Dakota. It's called Rock in the Hills. And a bunch of my college friends and a bunch of my military friends had all been planning. You know, we'd only been home for 2 months. Like, we were all going to get together. And so I said, I can't go to treatment. I'm going to this thing. And they're like, well, are you sure that's smart? And I said, look, I'm not suicidal. You know, I want to live, but I'm going to do this, which was probably stupid. But anyway, I drank my ass off. The last day was July 4th. And I was, we were supposed to drink that day. It was Sunday, and there were concerts that day, but the weather was shitty. And all my friends were like, let's just go home. You know, it's cold, it's rainy. And I hadn't told anybody. Like, I just kept this all to myself. And I was like, inside, I'm going, I need to drink, because this is probably my last hurrah. But no, we left. And inside I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll get home to Fargo tonight, and I'll just drink on my own, and then I will go to treatment. Well, I was so hung up. We drank so much for 3 days that I did not drink. And that is why my sobriety date is July 4th, 2004. And I love that, because that's Independence Day. And I feel like that's the day where I took control of my life. And so the next, I think it was Tuesday, it was 2 days later, I went into treatment. I ended up going to the VA outpatient treatment. And, you know, there was 8 people in my group. There was 6 Vietnam vets, 1 World War II vet, and then me. And I was just the kid. And they were all like, man, what are you doing here? You know, because I seemed so upbeat. And I'm like, you guys, it may seem weird, but if you would have saw me 2 weeks ago, you know, I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown. But anyway, so I hung out with all these guys for a month, and they would tell their stories about being in prison and losing everything. And they, you know, were so much older than I was. And I was, you know, I tell people, like, I don't know if I learned a bunch in treatment, like listening to the classes, but listening to those old veterans made me go, you know what? I never want to end up. Some of these guys had promising lives, and everything, you know, went down the gutter. So I got out of treatment at the end of, you know, probably beginning of August. That September, I went back to college at Valley City State University in North Dakota, about 60 miles from Fargo. I was 31 at the time. I lived in the dorms with all the freshmen for 2 years, and got my degree in 2006. In the summer of 2005, you know, I went to officer candidate school. So I ended up, you know, I took my commission in 2006. So yes, my life has gotten, you know, on some of my video, like my Janie Lane video, you'll see a picture of me before I quit drinking, and I was very big. And so, you know, I lost a bunch of weight. I quit smoking, you know, I'm kind of somebody who's obsessed with physical fitness nowadays. That's my one thing that I really think keeps me even keel. But yeah, so you know, in a way, I've always told people that I'm so appreciative of Iraq, because for many people it ended up ruining their lives or ending their lives, but for me it was like it gave me another chance to start over. So
When you talk about that feeling of shaking and you know, calling that treatment center in the yellow pages, I don't know your religious views. I mean, we get into this sometimes on Battle Line podcast, but do you feel it was some type of divine intervention? Because I can tell you in my life, there's been a few times where I feel like God scared the shit out of me and said, like, is this really what you want? And I think it happens to all of us at some point.
So I consider myself a Christian. I'm probably not a good Christian. I'm not somebody who goes to church all the time. My brother is he's a sheriff, and he is his small town church pastor. So talk about two roles that seem so he's always been a big influence on me. But so here's what I'll say about this. When I was in Iraq, it was the first time in many years that I prayed. And we had now what the heck's the word for the minister?
Is that like chaplain? Yeah, yeah.
Chaplain. The chaplain, he was this great guy, but every time we would go out on a mission, and I would go on 2 to 3 missions a week, he would come and pray with us. And I got to the point where I was like, wow, I'm glad that I have this. Like, I feel so much more at peace when I go out on the road when I do that. So there's this part of me that thinks, hey, is it a coincidence that the first time in my, where after my life had fallen apart, where I suddenly start praying or talking to God or whatever you want to say, is it a coincidence that shortly after that, I finally found the courage to say, you know what, I need to quit drinking, and found the strength to ask for help? So I like to think that there was something to that. Like you said, God was speaking to you. And so I like to think that, you know what, I was asking for help, and in a way it led me to getting my life somewhat on track.
Yeah, and it's a great story. I mean, I think there are a lot of stories we have on here are stories of redemption. And when you speak about you don't want people feeling bad for you with where you're at currently in life, I think for just about all of us, success or getting over some type of thing, it's never just that road. I think people like to put that happy ending as if their life is a book type of thing. And for most of us, that's just not reality. Like, there's highs and lows, and we all always go through them, and it's never, for most, until you die, it's never like the last chapter of, okay, I fixed everything and now my life was perfect from here. That's just not reality.
I think we kind of do, especially kids, a disservice when we say, oh, well, your goal should be to be happy. Of course you want to be happy, but nobody is just constantly, whoa, I'm just always happy. But you have great moments of happiness, and those are the things that drive you. I mean, today, I coached a basketball game today. Like, a lot of the day I kind of sat around, and I didn't have to do a whole lot today until that game. So was I really happy today? Well, I was happy for moments when I was coaching my team. And then, to be on here and I'm talking and I'm really enjoying this. Like, this
I'm
is
enjoying this too. Yeah.
So I don't like what with social media, and I always used to talk to my kids about this. Like, I even get into the trap where I look at my friends on social media, and what do we share? We all share, oh, look at how awesome my kids are and how awesome my husband is. Well, I mean, if we all got to see behind those few things that we share on social media, we all have these dark, down and moments of despair, but nobody's going to share that. And it gets too easy to look and go, oh my gosh, well, I'm not constantly happy like those guys are. Well, those guys aren't. But you know what? We were pretty lucky. We didn't have to grow up with, constantly looking for clicks and likes. But I feel like a lot of my students, and I still say my students because even my basketball players, they're still my students, and the kids that I teach. And my son is 16 and he's a junior in high school. And I feel like they have this pressure and they're constantly looking for validation. And, and that's unfortunate, but the world we live in is where, kids they get a lot of validation from social media, and adults aren't immune to that as well. So it's the world's changed a lot, but we all have our good days and we have our bad days.
Yeah, I think some of the change has been positive and some has been negative. I mean, the positive for me actually goes into what we're doing right now. I could tell you, coming from the world of traditional radio before podcasts were a thing, I got to experience that because I was in college '05 to '09. '04, I started at Temple and then I went to Hofstra University. But anyway, um, the point being that earlier in my radio career, there were always these gatekeepers. And unless you had their attention, they liked you for some reason, there was no way to really get anywhere in your career. And I think podcasts have changed the game for that. So if
Sure.
you're passionate about something and you're putting it out on social media, you could gain a following, you could meet like-minded people, but you could also make a living from doing this. I mean,
Sure.
the fact that I make any type of money doing this podcast with Chris or doing in the wild, and like this is a part of my career now, is truly a blessing. And I know if I got a show like what I have with Chris on some major network somewhere and I wanted to have you on and talk about 80s hair metal, some power that be would say to me, you can't do that, this is not the audience. And I do love the creative control that I get to do this. And even for you, which you would say is a smaller channel, you have that opportunity that a video blows up on YouTube and thousands of people are seeing it, which was the case with your Janie Lane video. I only know you because you came up on my feed and I
Right.
clicked on it, and that video gained a ton of traction.
Yeah, yeah. And I'd be lying if I said there wasn't this part of me that hopes that that YouTube channel leads to other opportunities.
I think it will.
When I think I said it earlier, when I was younger, I thought about going into radio or broadcasting, and I'm not saying that I'm so good at it. By the way, you have just this radio voice. Your voice screamed, put me on TV or put me on radio. But
Thank
but
you, man.
anyway,
Thank you.
you know, it's something that I do for fun. But sure, would if it led to something else, my son's that's so one good part about where I'm at life is I was pretty smart in saving my money when I deployed. So I was able, I paid off my house. And so, which is one reason I'm able to just coach basketball and maybe not, work as hard as I was. So, I'm open to other opportunities, and, and music is my passion. It's what I spend so much time doing. So, so for right now, I do it for fun, and I do it to meet people like you, and to share my, whatever knowledge it is that I have. But yes, if it opened up other doors, I'd be open to doing that.
I think it will. And yeah, there's a lot of people down about all the negatives about social media, which I completely get. But I do think it's created this way that you can kind of break out of the matrix. And there are people that break through and are able to make a living doing something that they love. I do think people of your generation, even Chris, will be like, these YouTubers, they think they don't have to
My
work for anything.
generation.
Yeah. They'll sometimes be like these YouTubers, these kids on TikTok. But I do think for some of them, man, if you can make a living talking about things that you're passionate about, how can you hate that? I certainly can't.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm my generation, so I'm 50. Yeah, and
Yeah, I'm 37, so it's a slightly different generation.
right. And one thing, you talked about how I changed. Well, so I was an E4 for 13 years in my military career, and then I was an officer for 9. And the last time I deployed was to Kosovo in 2009, and I was a company commander. And that is one I like the idea of not having to answer to somebody. I mean, I'm perfectly fine, I mean, I coach a high school basketball team. I obviously I have to answer to people, but like it's enjoyable to know, like with my YouTube channel, like, hey, I can do whatever I want, and if it succeeds, it's all on me, and if it fails, it's all on me. And so I like the idea of being my own boss. Though I was one thing you learn in the military is definitely how to follow, and I had to follow. So I'm not against that either, but I'm sure, you like being able to create your own content. And
100%.
that's one of the great things about social media and YouTube and the opportunities that we have now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I could tell you when I worked at SiriusXM, all the creative people were basically on floor 36, and we always referred to how floor 37, it was just always those guys at the top who would always be, you can't do this, you can't do that. And yeah, I always hated that. I
So
love the
what
fact that I get total, control of this.
so how long did you work at Sirius, and if you don't mind, like how did you get into that?
Really long time, man, because I started with Fangoria Radio, so I wasn't employed by Sirius, but Fangoria Radio was a show on Sirius, so that was '06, and then I got employed by Sirius, like, I'd have to look actually at my LinkedIn, but '08, '09, and then I quit in 2016, I believe, or 2017. So
Sure.
it's a pretty long time, man. So, I mean, I went to Hofstra University for radio, which
Okay.
led to an internship with Fangoria, and then that led to the job at Sirius. And all these things that I wanted to do actually came true because a lot of the time I spent uh, driving to Hofstra University every day, commuting, I would listen to Andrew Wilkow, and I got into political talk radio.
Sure.
And then I remember I had this idea. I want to fill in for Wilkow one day, and I got to do it because of becoming a part of SOFREP. And like
Yeah.
that led to me meeting those guys at SOFREP like Brandon Webb and Chris Peranto, which then led to this podcast happening.
Sure.
So it is always like opportunity just kind of happens when I think you have a positive attitude and you
Yeah.
meet great people that you click with.
Yeah. Yeah. So and so that's an awesome story, and like that's what you're doing now. I mean, that's inspiring to me, and I live to be inspired. I get inspired by
Same.
music. I look for people who, like I like to work out, who inspire me to push. I like to inspire the kids that I teach or the kids that I coach. And so like I love hearing that because I'm like, oh, hey, look at the career this guy's carved out. Like, hey, maybe I could, so it's awesome, and I appreciate you sharing that. And you're doing some good stuff here.
Yeah, I'm the same way. It's fun. I think I've mentioned this on the podcast, but even when I see these videos on YouTube of like when Eddie Van Halen was a mess at one point and he was on stage, barely getting through solos and stuff, also alcohol, substance abuse related stuff. But then you see videos later on and he's back to himself shredding. I find that inspiring,
Oh
actually, that
yeah.
the fact this guy like picked himself back up, that even I think the greatest guitar player of all time had those moments.
Oh yeah. And I mean, who doesn't love a good redemption story? I mean,
Yeah,
and for whatever mine's worth, I hope that and I'll throw this out there, like I'm always open to people who want to talk about, like people will reach out and say, hey man, I kind of struggled with alcohol. Well, I have no problem talking to people about that. I would never claim that I have any answers for that. But, if anybody, hears my story and is like, wow, I'd like to, like, hey, man, I'm not perfect. I mean, my life still has, a lot of things that I wish were better, but man, we need to lean on each other, and we need to steal ideas from people and take inspiration from others. So, if there's anybody out there listening to this and you're struggling with alcohol, my email is anthony.a.bryant@hotmail.com. I have a Facebook page called Classic Rock Fargo, where I kind of sell my shit, but people sometimes like that and they'll message me about stuff. So anyway, I mean, reach out to somebody, because my life was falling apart until I finally was like, you know what? I can't do this on my own. I need to talk to somebody else who knows more than I do. And so,
that's excellent. Well, interestingly enough, and I know we're coming to the end here a little bit, but I did want to ask you about this because it relates to what you're talking about. You may have seen on the YouTube channel the biggest video we have, which kind of blew up out of nowhere and is currently at the time of this recording at, I believe, 51,000 views. And we don't typically get videos like that. Was
yeah.
us talking about Rob O'Neill, Navy SEAL, getting into this bar fight recently and getting arrested, which is not the first time he's got arrested. The majority of the comments have been positive, but I'll be honest, there's been a bunch of comments too that are like, why are you guys talking about this? Why are you doing this for clickbait? Which to that I would respond, it's in the news. Like, I didn't break any private story regarding this guy's
Right.
life, and we didn't shit on him. We didn't say like, what a terrible person. Well, it wasn't that at all. It was just our reaction to it as two people, Chris and myself, who know him, not well or anything, but I've met the guy. I have pictures with him if people would like to see, and where he should probably go from here. But you have that experience, so not that I'm going to clip this or anything, because I think we've talked about it enough. But I do think it's interesting to get your perspective, because you come from that world and I don't. I don't know if it's the best thing that he immediately is still doing podcasts. And I listened to his podcast addressing this. And, one thing that he said was, he said, drinking all the time works out for some guys, and for some guys, it doesn't. And I have this issue. And to me, I would say it really never works out for anybody. I can't think of anyone that alcohol has like enriched their life. It creates great stories, but the same way that bad decisions just in general create great stories, but I don't think it could be positive for anyone. And I don't know how you feel, or if you even want to comment on it, but I I think he would probably benefit from taking a little time off and figuring this out, because he does say on the podcast that he addressed this. He's like, I'm going to be doing some stuff that's a little bit less intrusive, and be speaking with people. And hey, if it works out fine for him, that's great. I hope that he doesn't have to encounter these issues again. But I just wonder, from your perspective, do you think he would benefit from doing what you did, taking some time off, or just continuing to do what he's doing? Because he is still out there giving speeches. He is still doing a weekly podcast. And I don't know if that's personally the best thing to be doing after, in your mid 40s, you have this issue where you're getting into bar fights, which at that age, like, you got to find a way to make that not happen anymore.
Yeah, there's nothing sadder than old drunks. And I quit when I was 31, but anyway, everybody, people have to hit their own bottom. I mean, whatever, so your bottom is different than my bottom. I mean, luckily I didn't have to like kill somebody in a drunk driving crash. I didn't have to end up homeless on the street. I was for whatever reason able to stop before that. So it's so hard to. I've run into so many people who want to talk about their drinking, and which is great. They want to open up about it, but they are not ready to make that step. And I was encouraging them. I'm like, look, you will never, like, in 10 years, you will never regret quitting drinking, but you will never look back and say, yeah, you know what? Hey, I was glad that I kept drinking. I mean, that really worked out for me, but it's so with, I would assume that he might be saying one thing to people out front, because alcoholics, I mean, I used to always try to portray how I thought people wanted me to be portrayed. I wanted to portray myself one way, while on the inside, I wasn't telling people, yeah, like, man, this alcohol is fucking my life up. I just used to say, hey, I like to party. Like, look, I still have a job. I still have a girlfriend and a kid. I have a place to live. Like there's nothing wrong with that. But on the inside, I knew, but I wasn't going to come out and admit that, because I knew once I did, that's a door you can't close. So I'm sure, everybody knows this bad thing happened. So he has to acknowledge it, but he's probably going to play it off like, hey, it's not, hey, shit happened one night. Things got a little out of control. It's not that big a deal. No, I don't know this guy personally. So maybe that's the way it is, but like you said, you're in your 40s and you're getting into bar fights. They're sometimes where there's smoke, there's fire. So, I'm sure with whatever he's going through, he's probably doing a lot of battling on the inside. And that's what I used to do, a lot of battling on the inside. And it was the biggest relief when I finally, like that day when I went to treatment. I was actually supposed to work at my bartending job. And guess who was my bar manager that night? My brother, the current cop and pastor at his church. We used to work at the same restaurant together. And I called him up and I'm like, hey man, I can't be at my shift. I'm going to treatment. And he started bawling, but also was so happy because everybody could see it. Everybody could see I was out of control. Most people don't want to say anything because they don't want to, they don't want to lose your friendship. And unfortunately, a lot of times alcoholics, like if somebody did approach me about my drinking, I would get very defensive and very angry because I didn't want to face that and I didn't want people to know. But I mean, they were right. But I just didn't want, you just want to shove it under the rug and pretend like it's not there. But it was the biggest stress off my back when I finally, I called my mom. I'm like, hey mom, I'm in treatment. And I was able to open up like, yeah, here's how it was. Whereas before I was always lying, and then lying to cover up my lies. Oh, why didn't you come out for the family meal? Well, I was so hungover, there was no way. I was sleeping all day. I felt like shit. I was able to say, yeah, a lot of times when I didn't come home, I was hungover, but now I can tell the truth. And it was just freeing. Like even just telling you about it now, I can remember like, oh, like I felt like I could just exhale and tell the truth and not have to cover up for it. So anyway, you're right. He would probably benefit from taking a step back and taking a break. But if he's in the situation where he's got maybe a sort of problem, I imagine that there's a lot of things going on in here that are racing around in his brain. But I used to always make deals with myself. Hey, you'll quit in 6 months. Hey, you have this concert in November. You'll quit after then. Or you have this wedding, like you have to drink at that wedding, obviously, but you'll quit after then. So, you make deal after deal and I think I started making those deals when I was like 25 or 20. I remember vividly saying to myself, you're going to quit drinking when you're 27. Well, I didn't quit till I was like 31 or 32. So for 5 years, I went on that way slowly and steadily hitting whatever bottom was. And maybe that guy's there, hopefully not, but yeah. I suspect things.
I think a lot of people are going to appreciate you speaking about this, because I'm sure there's someone listening that this resonates with. But man, this has been a great conversation. As you could tell, I love nerding out about the 80s hair metal scene. I could talk about that stuff all day with anyone, but it's awesome hearing about your deployments and also hearing about it from a perspective very different from the guys who are the door kickers who deployed for that reason, who joined for that reason. And I think your perspective as a guy who went into the military not thinking you do any of that is going to be interesting for some people to hear, and I enjoyed hearing it. So yeah, I guess the last thing, what's upcoming on the channel? Do you have any shows that you're going out to? Any releases that you're looking forward to in that scene? Anything you want to plug? Any of that stuff?
Sure. So you mentioned my channel. It's called Hair Metal Haven. I actually changed the name of it, so it's still the same channel, but it's called Hair Metal Guru.
Yes, I know, and it's Hair Metal Guru 419 on YouTube.
My Twitter handle is Hair Metal Guru, and I thought, you know what, just change the YouTube channel, make it the same. So there is a video that, in fact, will probably be out in about 10 minutes whenever we get done with this, and it is on 10 hair metal bands that could have and should have but didn't. The bands that I love but never hit it big. Like Wild Side, Sleazebees. I don't know if you. So there's 10 albums that I'm going over. That's going to be coming.
I would put a band that I had mentioned earlier, Shotgun Messiah.
I would they're not on that list, but they easily could have been. And yeah, I'm sure there will be more.
But I guess you could say they sort of could have been. I mean, sort of made it because they did have a minor hit with Heartbreak Boulevard, which is still here on Sirius XM.
Sure. Yeah. So I would classify them as a band that could be. They had a minor hit, but they never reached the levels that a lot of people would have thought. But so that video is coming out tonight. I'm kind of busy with basketball. We don't get a ton of shows up here. Like,
yeah, that's got to be weird living there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
In the last couple of years, I've seen Kiss, I've seen Def Leppard and Poison, Tesla. But I probably get to 4 or 5 shows a year now. I mean, bigger, like national shows. And so, because that's about Journeys. Journey is coming with Toto in March, so I'll probably hit that. But you know, that shows it's September, and the next show that I could conceivably go to is Journey
Ooh.
in March.
Well, not that that's a bad thing,
That's
but
6 or 7 months though, you know.
yeah, I couldn't deal with that. That's actually because Chris, who I do the podcast with, lives in an even more remote area than you, in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, where I've been there. I have to drive an hour and a half from the airport to get to where he is. So he doesn't have any shows that come remotely near him, and he doesn't care. If
Yeah.
you are someone into this life, which I am,
Yeah.
that I couldn't deal with. You know what I'm wondering? Out of curiosity, have you ever been to the Sunset Strip?
I have. It was in 2017. So not anywhere near the time where it would have been, but I was with a girl who had work out there and was like, hey, so I went along. I went to the Rainbow, I went to the Whiskey, and just to be part of that that area. So I visited it once. I can't imagine, you know, I don't know if you've ever watched The Decline of Western Civilization.
Yes, oh, of course.
To the metal years.
Of course.
You know, I mean, I don't think nobody can imagine what that would have been like to be there unless you were there, and we'll never see that again. But you watch that video and you understand, I think, why people love that era, why people love that music, that positivity, that never say die, that I'm gonna make it no matter what. I mean, you know, it just makes you feel like anything's possible. And that's, you know, one of the fun things about 80s rock or hair metal or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, so what I was going to tell you, I did get to go to the Sunset Strip New Year's Eve of 2021 going into 2022.
Sure.
And there are, I mean, it is still that scene, even though people who tell you who
Oh,
live
yeah.
there will say it's not in that. Do you follow Priya Panda by any chance, who was in the
I
band
know who
Diamonds?
she is. Yes.
So she lives, I don't know if she currently lives there, but she's talked about that she did live there recently because she's like, I get to see all these cool shows.
Sure.
So like the Whiskey A Go-Go still caters to the bands that we love.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's why New Year's Eve I saw LA Guns, and then the next night I saw Faster Pussycat. I got to go to the Comedy Store. I saw Earl Skakel, Inappropriate Earl, who is just as big a fan of this type of stuff as you and I. And he's a regular at the Comedy Store Monday through Friday. I believe you're going to get to see him if you just stop there any random night. And I may do it again New Year's Eve of this year, as long as this COVID 2.0 shit is not for real. With, you know, and if it happens, LA, I'm sure will be mask mandated and all
totally.
that. But if you look at what's coming up the night of New Year's Eve, now I don't really care about Pretty Boy Floyd, but I believe they're like December 28th. And then followed by that, you got Stephen Piercy. And then the following night, you got LA Guns. And then the night after that, you got Faster Pussycat. So I'm just like, man, how much fun would it be to go there to see these shows? So even though LA, it may not be the scene it was from the 80s, if you live in that area, you get to see some pretty cool shit. And there's a girl that I even met in Connecticut who was at those shows, and she was telling me, yeah, I have a place in LA, and like I get to go to all these shows when I'm there. So it's the opposite of what you experience in Fargo, North Dakota.
Oh yeah. And I do like when I plan trips, I plan them like I love music stores like with physical. So when I plan trips, I try to plan them around music.
I'm gonna hold this up. I still buy CDs, bro.
Oh yeah, there you go. Totally.
Yeah.
You know what? At some point, I will record what my house looks like, because I probably have 3,000 CDs. There's frames of vintage ads, all and not. I mean, I love it. It's probably a bit much, but just so people, you know, can understand, like when I say that my house looks like a hair metal museum, It really does look like a hair metal museum. But yeah, so I do want to plan another trip to go to LA, just because you're right. You go into the Rainbow Bar and Grill, which is right next to the whiskey, and it's still like it's people that crave that atmosphere, that love that music. That's why people go there. And so, we were talking about the small club shows with these bands. You're going to meet hardcore fans. Well, you're going to meet hardcore fans of the 80s rock scene when you go to the whiskey and when you go to the Rainbow.
You're going to meet people who literally live there just so they could experience that.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So once again, guys, it's at Hair Metal Guru 419 on YouTube, at Hair Metal Guru on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. You're not on Instagram, right?
Yeah, you know what? I have an Instagram account. I very rarely use it.
Okay.
I have one for Anthony Bryant, and then I have one for my classic rock Fargo page, which is again where I usually just say, hey, here's something that I framed, and here's an old ad of a Bullet Boys ad framed, so I do share stuff like that. Facebook and Twitter is probably the best place to reach out to me, but yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. I really enjoyed it. If you guys enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe, leave us a review if you're listening on the audio platforms. And yeah, I love when these two worlds of mine collide. My two worlds of things that I'm interested in and things that I do professionally end up being military, particularly special operations military, and my love of 80s hair metal. And I will say it, no matter what, I have no problem calling it hair metal. It is not a genre that needs to take itself so freaking seriously. So yeah, I love it, and I live for that stuff.
Hey man, I appreciate you having me on, and for supporting my stuff. And anytime you want to do it again, let me know. But I appreciate your support of the military. Truly, it means a lot. It's not always an easy life, and nowadays maybe it's not as appreciated as it was in the past. But people like you that support people that served are awesome, and so I thank you for that.
Thanks, man. And I mean, for me, I get to talk to some really awesome people, so it doesn't get better than that, in my opinion. So thanks so much.
All right, brother, I appreciate it, man.
That's all for this episode of Battle Line Podcast, but we're always posting new content on social media. Follow us on Instagram at Battle Line Podcast and on Twitter at Battle Line Pod. That's an order. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes up every Tuesday. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Believe in yourself. Face all challenges head on. And as always, never quit.